Welcome to Between Chapters. I'm Eric, and I finished my book. Draft 1 of Where Magic Slept is done. Just to be clear, I did record that video where I was talking about being close to being done a couple weeks ago, even though I released it recently. I tend to batch record videos on some level and release them over time because I don't always have time to sit down and do these videos and record them. So it's a little bit kind of weird where I don't really know when I did what. And I just want you to know I've been writing for a couple weeks to get to this point of finishing. So it wasn't like I was at 90,000 words and then 2 days later I was at 130,000. But what I want to do today is talk about it and do a little bit of a Q&A. I got some questions and I want to answer them about this process as I reflect back on achieving something that I'm super proud of, which is a finished novel. Now it's all into the tweaking. I'm in the edits. I'm actually in chapter 13 of Where Magic Slept in the re-edit, which isn't a big full-on edit. It's more or less trimming some parts so that when I give it to beta readers or when I give it to an editor, I've already done some of that legwork of trimming things here and there, realizing I over-explained this because as I write, I put a lot of detail in there and then I can trim back because it's, easier for me to take stuff away than to keep adding and adding and adding, which there'll be some of that anyway. I will have to add some things, I'm pretty sure, because I don't think I nailed it in draft 1. So I put out an announcement and I got about 8 questions that I want to talk about and answer here right now. So if you're interested in that in the writing process or just wanting to hang out for a little bit and talk story, let's do it. Question number 1 is, did you have a favorite character to write? I did, but it wasn't the one I thought it would be. Bram is the main character, and you would assume that it would be that one, but I had the most fun writing a character named Ilvin. This is a character you don't meet right away, so I didn't even know Ilvin until I was well into writing, and once I brought him onto the page, the way he spoke, and again, I'm not doing spoilers here, the way his character evolves over time, who his character is, was super fun to write. And I found myself wanting to write more and more for him, but at the same time knowing that this wasn't the time. I had to focus on the story and give you enough of who he was and his arc because it was very important to the story. But it was really easy for me to start wanting to just really lean into him and give him more page time. I really liked his wit, his cool, calculating nature, and sort of the mystery of what his intentions were. This is really hard to do because I want to get into it. And in fact, when I release the book and get it out to you guys, one of the things that I want to do is have more discussions and character studies and understand what philosophies I put in where and what each chapter means and go deeper into the text with you guys because I hope to have written a really entertaining novel, but one that has a lot of deep insight into my own journey and what I've seen through the mental health journey and just what the hero's journey means to us as human beings trying to be the hero of our life story. But Ilvin was really fun to write the dialogue and to think in a way, I want to say sneaky, but really clever. And I think it's because I didn't feel that way in my life. I didn't feel like I was the guy who had the answer for everything, who would just be calm in every situation. So when I'm writing a character like that, who is every character is part of you in some regard. You draw on a part of yourself, but that was such a weak part of myself. It was really fun to give all of these powers, not magical, but I'm saying give these attributes to someone to be like a version of me that I wanted to bring forward more. So having time to think about how I might respond if I was Ilvin in the situation, how Ilvin would respond and how he would position things and structure things and angle things so it worked towards what he wanted as an outcome was super fun to do because it's not something I can do in my daily life. And part of creativity is allowing those trapped or underdeveloped parts of ourselves get page time, get time in the light. And in so doing, hopefully, and I believe it's true, allows me to see that quality in myself in a positive, healthy way. Question number 2 is, did I have a favorite relationship, or did you have a favorite relationship to write? And this one changed over time. Again, there is a relationship between characters. There's, the hero and the mentor, which we have in Bram and Aldo, who you meet sometime after chapter 6, I think maybe it's in chapter 6 or not. Spoiler alert. And you have a character, Vera, and through that triangle of people, those were really fun relationships to work because each one of those relationships, Bram, Vera, Bram, Aldo, Aldo, Vera, they're all really interesting because they have their own dynamic. So they were fun. The main villain and his way of having a relationship with the people around him was really fun to write too. There's also this dynamic between 4 characters, and again, Ilvin's in that mix. That quartet was really fun to write, the relationship. And, it's not romance. you know, like you would maybe think the question would answer. Like that was super fun to write. Romance is fun to write. I get that, and it's passionate and all this stuff. But for whatever reason, and I probably should think about this because the question is really making me wonder why I was so invested in this quartet of people with Elvin and these other 3 people, but it's not the main story. And I think the reason I enjoyed it or had fun writing that was because it gave me hope that I could write a complex story. Did I nail it in this book? God, I hope so. I hope I did a good enough job that it's engaging and you enjoy it. Am I a main heavyweight Brandon Sanderson caliber multi-POV guy? No, I'm not. But the fact that I was engaged in my characters enough, whether I execute it perfectly or good enough, that's for you to decide. But I was engaged enough with my characters, which meant they had soul. It meant that there's something there. And so the fact that I did write a relationship, a quartet of people that had dynamics and each had their own arc, it made me hopeful for my future writing. And so, yes, I liked the writing, but it's like this idea you're investing so much time into something that when you have hope on the horizon of where you can go and that there's so much more you can learn and develop, that is exciting to me, or it is now. It used to not be. I wanted to nail it right now and be great and, you know, hey, Tor, take my book and publish it. I know you want it because it's pretty damn good. Instead being like, I'm going to get there. And I believe I can because of these things I'm starting to see. The way I'm being pulled into my own story and excited about these things that aren't the main story, even though I'm really excited about the main story, I'm excited about these side ones too, because they're starting to weave in and it's creating this robust world. And so that's a really important thing in fantasy, is to create a total world. And I really like focusing on one story. So this is a stretch for me. And the fact that I enjoyed it kind of buffed it a bit, you know, where I love Bram's story. But the fact that I love that story is a given. You should, as a writer, you should love that story. But the side characters and those dynamics that had nothing to do necessarily with Bram, and they're in the same world, so they do, but the fact that I liked those stories and was inspired by those stories and developments, that gives me hope for the future. So that's why I would choose that relationship, that quartet, as my favorite relationship to write. The next question is, did you favor action scenes or character scenes? And this is interesting because in the past I wrote action scenes and never thought I could write action scenes, but I wrote this novel, The Red King. It never got published, never went anywhere, but it was my first novel I wrote. And there's a lot of action scenes because it's this dystopian science fiction soldier story. So you're going to have action sequence, you know, and there's character work. And I think character work is so important and action is so important, but so often the action can stand in for the character work. And I really didn't want to run that risk. So I enjoyed both, but the way I'm going to answer this question is what gave me the most goosebumps? What got me the most high, you know, dopamine rush, like, oh, hell yeah. I would say it was the character work. But on some of the action stuff, I got really worked up and super excited about once I even got like, oh, that made me uncomfortable as I'm typing this stuff. But that's sort of the goal, is if I'm feeling something as a writer, hopefully you're feeling something as a reader. But I had more of those moments in the emotional scenes, in the conversations and developing and showing different sides of the characters through actions that were happening or observations they were making or the way the world was influencing them. That was really fun because that was this really sprawling thing of inspiration versus the action being sometimes little concise, like aha moments. But then I also had one moment where the action scene drove the character arc in a way that I didn't know I was going to go. And that was really exciting. So is that character or is that action? It's really both, but not in the way that maybe you would expect it. Like it's not clean cut all the time, but the character development, when I found ways to do that, was what got me most excited. And I had more of those moments. So I'd say the character work. Next question is, did you struggle getting characters from A to B? And the answer is yes. But what I've found is that you sometimes write yourself into a corner or write a character into a corner because you don't know where to go. And I think it's good because then it forces you to think, how is this situation going to turn out in the character's developmental favor, whether it's victory or defeat? And sometimes I knew where I wanted the character to end up, but it was hard to figure out what steps do they have to walk to get there. Sometimes I could figure it out and I could easily plot it out. Sometimes I had to be like, he stepped outside. and then we'll go from there, and just figure out what he's going to discover, what she's going to discover, what's going to happen. And then as you get closer, you pick up momentum because you start to see it. And I think I was lucky because a lot of times I didn't have to rewrite everything, although sometimes I did have to make some decent changes to get A to B. But for the most part, the hardest part was when I didn't have an idea and I had to stop writing and then think on it. And sometimes that idea came to me in bed, and I'd wake up and put my little note, in my phone, and the next day I'd go after it. But I felt really excited because I solved it. And that's one of the things I think as a writer you need to love, is the excitement and the thrill of solving a problem, because problems are going to abound. I've run into things where I even was like, dang it, this goes against my magic system. So now I have to think about this. So it's not even just the character A to B, it's the cohesion of a system or a world, or why is this character necessary? And you have to take them from A to B, from A being irrelevant to B being necessary. So I had a lot of issues that came up over time, but a lot of excitement in solving those problems. But struggle is very much a spectrum. Was it a big struggle in this novel? Not very much. It really was pretty solvable. I'm saying pretty solvable to say the time it took me to figure something out, usually 90% of the time was within a day or two. In the past, it might be weeks where I'm just like, forget this part of the book and I'm going to move on and I'll come back to it when I just need to keep getting some momentum going, and then I'll figure it out later. I didn't really have that this time. There was a couple things that maybe I set down that if I really thought about it, probably did, but it was so minute. And it was so easy to continue on somewhere else and solve that, or let the future writing solve the earlier problem, because now you know where you want it to go. So I feel like I've developed some new habits where I'm not freaked out by it. So the struggle is less because I'm not panicked. I don't feel desperate or afraid that I can't do it and that I'll never figure it out. I just have developed systems or have practices that allow me to move through it a lot faster. Like I said, letting it lie. I even had some times where I said I bracketed things and just put in I need to figure out how to make this make sense. Then continue on with the story with a couple spaces in between. And then I figured it out later because I just needed more data. I needed more detail, more story development, so I could figure out what I needed this first scene or what I needed them to experience here to get to there. It was kind of a struggle, but not nearly as much as it's been in the past. Next question is, did you leave it hanging on a cliff at the end? How does one answer this without a spoiler? I will tell you how. The answer is, I tried not to. Everything I've heard from the industry is, if you're a new author, don't have a cliffhanger, but have a promise or an opportunity for a book 2 or for a series. Now, if you have 3 books already done, maybe you lead with that and that's a different conversation, but nobody knows me. Nobody knows if they want to read a book 2, and maybe they like book 1, but nothing in the world makes them want to see a book 2. So what I did in A to B, like the last question, start of the story A, end of the story B, I did struggle with that to a degree, even though I had some of the ending scripted early and it just was out there. I knew where I wanted to end up. It wasn't the end. It was a part of a character development in the end that happened at the end. So my answer is, I give resolution. This could end, but I also left it open with some imagery and some action that hopefully makes you want to know what it means or what, but you don't need the answer. That's what I'm trying to do. Give you an opening in hopes that you want to walk and be like, well, what's that about? But not in a way that makes you go, well, if there's no book 2, there's no satisfaction here. Because I don't like it when that happens. Because sometimes I don't want to read book 2, or sometimes I don't want to watch season 2. But so I'm working on it. So actively in my edits, I think yesterday I just figured out a way that I can take early in the book, in the early chapters, and give you a glimpse of what the main character hopes is going to be the resolution, because you want to make promises early, tone promises, and what the characters want and what the hope is, the point of the quest, whatever. And at the end, you have to give that to the reader or take it away. And that's, tragedy, but I have a hard time writing pure tragedy. So figuring that out, I hope it's satisfying. Beta readers are going to tell me if it is or isn't. But at this point, it does not end in a cliffhanger, but it resolves and gives you a little bit of, interesting. I would like to see more about that. That's my hope anyway. And I guess I kind of answered this because it's pretty similar. Are you going on to part 2, or is this a self-contained story? I'm going on to a part 2. My plan has always been, since writing this, is at least 3 novels. The story is planned for what I would like the next story to be and what I would like it to deal with. I will not get into that, I suppose, but there's a lot more I have to say and demonstrate, and that includes more of the magic system. In this novel, one of the risks and the fears, I guess, that I had was I'm trying to take a world where magic slept, give you seeds of it, give you flavors of it, and then open it up and give you more of it. But I don't know if I gave you enough. And that's one of my fears. I want to give you, when I was writing, I was thinking of, and I haven't seen Game of Thrones, sorry. But I remember hearing all of the people being angry about, where's the dragons? Where's the dragons? And, you know, that was a big sell, was the dragons. And so I was afraid that in writing this novel, I would say, there's magic. And then you'd be like, where's the magic? Where's the magic? Where's the magic? That's the magic? We only got a little bit or something. So I tried to balance that where you're learning the system with Bram. You're seeing enough of it to not overwhelm, but also you're getting enough of it that you feel like this is a fantasy. This is a cool magic system, and I want to know more about it. Book 2 would be where we dig in a lot. So I wanted that to feel earned and natural. So book 2 is going to allow me to do that more if book 1 is something people enjoyed. Final question is, how did your story concept evolve as you wrote it? And I can tie this back to the last question because the story process evolved as I learned where I needed to give you more. I had the story set. It was a 13,000 word short story that I wrote and had a conclusion that wasn't the conclusion that you still see now in the novel. It was more of the start of the third act. That's where it ended in the short story. And in that short story, there's really no magic. There's the rebirth of magic. So very little actually occurs that was magical. And so from short story to long form, it evolved. I saw the story. I had to put all these tent poles in. Then I was realizing as I went, I needed to give you more character. I needed to give you more magic, and found ways to infuse that magic in a natural way, in a way that made sense. And that changed the mythology of the world to a degree. Why could magic exist here, but not here? And so I had to answer those questions, and that is evolution. And I'm still in it now, where there's a group called the Rootsworn. That was an evolution that didn't exist in the early drafts, or in the short story, and didn't exist until I started brainstorming as I was going to take this short story and make it a long form novel. And so the Rootsworn were these leaders of each village, this greatest steward of the animal magic for their specific culture or their specific binding ability. And so when this curse forever winter was going to fall, they knew it, and they essentially surrendered themselves to the root mother, Venandril, and went into a hibernation, so to speak, so that they could survive. And when the world were to thaw, if it ever did, they could teach the ways of old magic. They could rise up the next generation of beastbinders. So that was something that evolved over time. And if they came awake, what would they do? Who would they be? What would they look like? Where would they go? You know, where would they be? All of those things were evolutions. And I had to figure out how to make that make sense and not be just a encyclopedic textbook, and also make it where they had to teach realistically, because you only had, you know, a very short period of time, and then you have to use magic. So that was an evolution of figuring out how to make everything realistic, but also a bit of a stretch. It's fantasy, right? So I wanted to push it a little bit further, but also make it realistic, bite-sized for these people. If they were to learn magic, they could figure out some things, and it's not a 10-year master's degree where you have to go off to, you know, wizard school and learn all these arcane magic spells and whatnot. So the magic system evolved, the characters evolved, I added characters, I removed, I think, one character completely, or no, I didn't remove them. I switched the characterization because that quartet I talked about earlier, there was some difference in characterization where one of the characters was obsessed with this other person in kind of a, not romantic way, but not in the way that it ended up being. Now, instead of an obsession with the character, it's an admiration of like, wow, that person was kind. And they could have killed me, and that just messes my idea up about the enemy. So that shifted and that evolved. And I think for me personally, it needs to evolve as I write it and I get to know the characters, because you're like, that wouldn't be what that character did. And one of the characters, I rewrote a lot of their dialogue so they could sound more like themselves, because they started out kind of this brash dude, and they eventually kind of became this dwarfish kind of character, really not the smartest, but really street smart. You know, but not tactically smart and arrogant and all this. And that changed the way I made him talk. So there was a lot of evolution in the speech patterns of people. And that probably will continue in draft 1 revisions. And as I go to get an editor, like, I'm sure that's going to change and evolve more. But as a story, that's the main way that things changed or evolved. There's also a pretty big, pretty major evolution that occurred that I can't share. Otherwise, I'd give too much away. But it was in the story. as like a concept, a metaphor, and an idea that I never was going to dive into. But over time, I realized there was a perfect opportunity, and it changed not the ending, but how we got to the ending pretty drastically, because I had two paths to go on this ending, and I wrote both of them and then ultimately chose one over the other. And I realized that the one I wanted to choose just felt not earned. And so I was able to figure out through talking to my writers group and some people, I could foreshadow it much better. And I realized I already had done it. I just did it in a way that influenced me, not the reader. So I could go back and seed all of these things so that this moment was earned. And that changed a few things about the story in a really exciting way. And that was an evolution that I'm really excited about. I think more than any of the evolutions. And now, hopefully, it will be paid off and you will appreciate the evolution as well. So that's all of the questions I had. If you have any more questions that weren't here or I missed your question, please comment and I can make future videos that go into these kind of Q&A topics if they're helpful to you or interesting to you, entertaining to you, whatever. I also want to ask you guys if you want a chapter 2 audiobook sample where I do another reading of chapter 2 so you can get to know some of the tone shifts and how after chapter 1, what is Bram going to experience. I'm open to it, but only if you guys want that. Otherwise, I'm going to be just editing and hopefully getting out some ARCs by year's end. I don't know if that's even realistic. There's different timelines I've seen where it's like from now, it's a year from now to get things done. And I don't necessarily believe that, but lots of things left to do. And I've got some feelers out for some literary agents. So I'm walking down those paths, and as I get results and things, I'll let you guys know the process, of failing and succeeding. And between chapters is going to evolve over time. I do see this channel being, split in playlists. So it's an episodic between chapters here, and it's more focused on what I'm reading. And then it's going to be, the creative concepts of writing and pursuing an author where you can just dive into those playlists and also watch either one that you want to watch, because that's just part of who I am. I took the creative resiliency, the more coaching side, and put it into Daily Heroics on a separate channel, which you can go check out at the Daily Heroics and see if that stuff is beneficial to you. And that was a clear delineation I wanted to make, because they are really the same brand but different. And it is my hope that when the book comes out, I can leverage that channel to be a platform where I can host some calls to talk about the book, and we can go through it together and flesh out the different concepts. And would love to hear what you guys think of it when you get the book and if the messages are landing. But we're a little ways away from that, aren't we? So that's going to do it for this video. I really appreciate you stopping by. I hope to see you in the next one. And until then, journey well, my friends.